Psalm 51 is David's prayer after the sorry events recorded in 2 Samuel chapters 11 and 12, when he slept with another man's wife and then got the husband killed to try to cover up his actions. And then the prophet Nathan challenged him about all that, and he responded. These chapters are a sad reminder to us that we're all capable of almost anything. So here are a few questions to mull over relating to those events, and particularly to this psalm, Psalm 51. Firstly, how do you feel when you think about King David's actions? Are you shocked? Are you surprised? Do you feel disappointed or sad or angry, or maybe all of those things? Secondly, the Bible says that David is a man after God's own heart. That's recorded in 1 Samuel chapter 13 and verse 14. What do you think that means? Clearly, it's not a reference to his adultery, his murder, his cheating. So what is it about? And before we get too pedantic and point out that this verse about David being a man after God's own heart in 1 Samuel comes long before the sins of David recorded in 2 Samuel, notice that Paul quotes this verse in Acts 13 verse 22, describing David as a man after God's own heart, and goes on to include these words from God, describing David as a man after God's own heart who will do everything I want him to do. So what is this being a person after God's own heart about? Let me put it another way. What kind of adjectives to describe David come to mind for you as you read this psalm? For me, it's words like broken, desperate, humble, contrite. So here we have Israel, a nation at war in 1 Samuel, and we have David, a man at war with his own demons, and a man at war with the darkness of his own heart. There's lots to discuss about him and about this psalm. But here's another question that this episode generates for me that you may feel takes us off point, but I think is deeply relevant and might generate some other interesting discussion. David was leading a theocratic nation, a nation headed by God, equivalent, arguably, to the church today. And sadly, David gets it horribly wrong. But that raises this question for me about our place in wider society. Are culture wars with society at large really appropriate? Or should we be seeking to get it right within the community and then humbly seeking to live by God's standards and then winsomely offering those standards to society at large? Think about the metaphors that Jesus uses about the way we are to influence society, the metaphors of salt and light, neither of which are metaphors of power. And finally, how are we to read the last two verses of the psalm, verses 18 to 19, which read like this? May it please you to prosper Zion, to build up the walls of Jerusalem. Then you will delight in the sacrifices of the righteous, in burnt offerings offered whole. Then bulls will be offered on your altar. My own view is that David is not praying for the bricks and mortars of a city, but that he's praying for the community, and that the community is to live missionally and sacrificially. The community is to live as salt and light, and the community is to live in ways that make a difference in their own lives and in wider society. The little comments about sacrifices are clearly to be read now in the light of the New Testament, where we read, for example, in Romans 12 verses 1 and 2, Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So some questions for discussion. How do you feel when you think about King David's actions? What do you think it means to be a person after God's own heart? Are culture wars really appropriate? And what are verses 18 and 19 about? Have a good time discussing those. Bless you.